time and grief we go. Gotta learn to let it go. Once asleep, now awake, feeling every breath you take.
Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast, hosted by Alix and David Long, where we talk about living consciously and helping people uncover their essential selves so that they can stop sleepwalking through life. Our goal is to create a safe space where our guests can share how they've decided to wake the F up and become mindfulness experts through their own emotional healing journey. Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast. I am your host, Alix Long, and this is my co-host, David Long. And we are so excited today to come in, just the two of us. So we've had a ton of feedback from the listeners that you wanted us to talk a little bit more in depth on certain topics that you have been asking questions about. And we're also taking some of the most searched topics in terms of healing and things such as anxiety and whatnot to kind of dive deeper in our experiential learning. So we are so excited this month. We're going to be focusing on people pleasing. I would like to maybe umbrella this topic with a different terminology. I like to call this month the month of authenticity. I think that we did an amazing job kicking off. I was actually last week out on spring break with 4/5 of our kids. I was in teenage spring break, crazy and still recovering. And I'm so proud of my stepdaughter, Kate, for coming on and telling her story. I think we got so much feedback on um, her bravery about talking about losing her mom and what it feels like to be not okay. And it's okay to not be okay. And so that topic really is the launcher of what we're going to be talking about today, which is people pleasing. And this is a really personal topic to David and I. When you're a widow or a widower, you have to look back on your marriage and really, it's like, you're searching for the diamonds through sand and all the muck in the water. It's like you're cleaning out all the dirt to look for the gems of like, what was it that wasn't working? What was it that was working? You're able to really assess your past relationship in a different way because you have all this time and space in grief and being alone. And so I think in both of our marriages, there's so much good, but we on this show highly believe in not putting our lost loved ones on pedestals. We believe that this is a human experience, right? We believe that Carl and Betsy were lovable with all of their good and not good qualities, right? Because we're the same. We have so many great qualities and not good qualities. And that's the human experience, is to make mistakes. And I think in people pleasing and perfectionism, which is a major search topic in healing, we create this false scenario, especially in platforms like this, right? Where we're social media, we're talking about things where we make the best presentation of who we are when we're in the public, when we're in a job interview, when we're with our friends, and maybe even in our relationships and our family dynamics, we want to put our best foot forward and we want to appear to have it all together and everything be okay. And I don't think Kate could have said it any better, that it is okay to not be okay. And it's okay that Betsy and Carl were amazing and also not okay, because it's real. And no matter what, I can at least speak for Carl. I loved him so much, and he was literally externally um, a major perfectionist. And he wanted everything not just to be perfect on a plate, but to be perfect in presentation. And that was a big part of, that's a big culinary thing, is everything has to look right. Right. And I think that he didn't really always hold that expectation up for others, but he sure did hold that up for himself, and maybe in some microcosms held that up for Kate and I. And it was really, I played right into that role because
I've actually never made that parallel before.
yeah, I mean, so, making a
I've never
perfect
thought about the fact that he was trying to make the plate perfect.
everything. Oh my gosh, every dish, they wipe the plate down. They make sure there can't be a crumb of out of place on their dish.
And Betsy was certainly trying to make
Yeah.
Botox and filler.
Dermatology is major. I mean, that's aesthetically everything pleasing.
Perfect,
yeah. And I think it's really interesting. So David and I both came to this marriage, having to be really honest, because we were friends first before we fell in love, about like, who are we now when you become a widow, right? Everything is completely broken. And then every decision you make after that, the world really presses, you should do this, you shouldn't do this, don't sell your house, don't move, don't date, don't make any sudden moves, all the stuff like, and it's usually coming from people who've never actually lost anyone. But society really needs you to stay still and be the same person. This felt to me, and maybe to you too, like, I don't know, like such heavy friction, like kind of like how diamonds are made. Like I felt like there was such deep pressure on me to keep it all perfect. And I recognize looking back, I had been carrying that all through cancer journey. Hold it up, stay positive, be okay, keep everybody safe, get to the doctor, be a good mom, show up, work, pay all the bills. Like I was carrying so many hats that and putting a smile on my face, And I remember writing blogs that were intense, and Carl would edit the blogs. He was an incredible writer, and he would tell me I really needed to rewrite my story and end on a positive note. And I've said this many times in the blog. He used to always ask people, "How you doing today?" And if someone said, I'm not doing great," he'd be like, "Why do people do that? Like, why do they tell you they're not okay? I'm asking you if you're okay today." And he wanted them to be like, "I'm doing great, boss." And I just said to him, I remember even then, like I might have recognized his need for everyone to be happy and okay. And
Yeah,
it's a mirror, right? Like an internal, external
I did
mirror.
that. I mean, I never told anybody that I wasn't okay until after the death.
Yeah.
Ever. If you ask me, even if I was having the worst day of my life, if you asked me how I was doing, I'd say I was okay.
Yeah.
But afterwards, the not okay was so intense that it was unavoidable. And when people would ask me, how are you doing today, David? I'd be like, have a shitty day today. I'm feeling down. I'm feeling bad. Can't get my kids out of bed or whatever was not good. And most people would immediately backpedal.
You could literally physically see
he's
people
telling me he's not
backpedal.
having a good day. I got to get out of this conversation.
So we want to talk about that, right? Okay, so we hope in this experience of listening to our podcast in Wake app, we're trying to give you tools to wake up. That's the whole purpose, right? What is waking up? Waking up means being authentic, but waking up actually doesn't mean being perfect. Waking up means paying attention. And if you look through, I'm taking another amazing long somatic and trauma course in EMDR training right now. And the major thing in EMDR therapy, the major thing in running the history is getting people to pay attention to how they feel in their body, embodied living. So
Actually,
paying attention.
I think that's the main difference between people pleasing in a pathological way and making people happy in an okay way.
Right.
That's the difference, is being aware.
So
if you're aware that you're making a decision, assuming that it's not actively hurting you, that's authentically to help or to please someone else, that's okay. The problem is when you don't think about it and you're just all the time trying to make someone happy at your own detriment.
there's the line.
Then that's
Okay, so let's ask ourselves this
the
question at
difference.
home. Do you find yourself making decisions on the regular with relationships, children, your emotional partners, your friendships, where it's sort of like the party effect? You got this party you're supposed to go to on Friday night. You've had a shitty week at work. You're exhausted. You've been run down. If you're got multifaceted relationships at your home, like children or extra responsibilities, like most of us do, you're burnt out, right? By Friday, you might be like, oh, the last thing I want to do is zip up a tight formal dress and put high heels on and do my makeup and pretend to small talk with a bunch of people who I don't have the energy for tonight. And even if you like the people, but often we will push ourselves to go because we have to go because we said we were going to go. And we don't take the time to say, I actually need to take care of myself tonight. I need to like stay in my pajamas, hydrate, whatever, read a book, do whatever the recharge methods are for you. Now, that's like a basic, like almost all of us can relate to that, like going to some social function that depletes you versus energizes you. But the world can be like that. So, like, where are all the places that you feel, and I like to call this like an internal friction, where you know that you're doing something And he said, against the detriment of yourself, that giving out whatever this energy is, energy is just an exchange and we only have so much of it, right? And I like to think about being awake or being aware as like being a widow and losing our spouses. We lost them in very different ways, but both tragic ways, made me wake up in the sense that we live one life, right? That time is actually really fragile. We don't live like that when we're young. We don't live like that really until we get a diagnosis or something wakes us up and scares us that, yeah, oh, that could happen to us, We don't have a lot of time, is what I'm saying. So how we spend our time, that resource is finite. And I like to think about how I'm spending my time these days. Anyway, so what do you think? So why do you think people pleasing starts? Like, how does this begin? How do you know, how can someone at home who may have this internal friction to do things all the time for others against the detriment of themselves, how can they recognize this?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's any question that comes from our childhood.
Agree.
That generally parents, myself included, put a lot of pressure on kids to be a certain way, to be okay. And we teach them at an early age that if you want my attention or if you want my approval, that you have to please me by doing what I ask. And in fact, if you tell me that you don't want to do what I ask, you get the opposite, right? You get displeasure, which as a child is very upsetting because you want to intrinsically please your parents. You rely on them for everything, and that you mainly love, and you think that without their love that you're nothing, right? So you're willing to do almost anything to get their love and approval. And I think as parents, we have to be aware that kids, that's where they're coming from.
Well, right.
And we have to give them space to be able to, number one, know that you'll love them no matter what.
Yeah.
And number two, that if they do choose themselves against your will, that sometimes that's okay.
As long as they're safe.
Right. Exactly. So that's kind of where we draw the line. I used to ask Jan about this, like, how do we decide when to discipline the kids and when to just let them go? It basically comes down to the behavior, right? So, I mean, they can say whatever they want. They can, sleep in on Sunday, but it's when they start smoking cigarettes or
they could harm themselves,
or hitting somebody, or it's the behavior is where the line gets drawn. They can explore all kinds of things short of harm, and that's where we draw the line. We try to draw the line, but I think that's where it comes from for sure. In my family, there was an unspoken and spoken need to please, and that was intense.
Yeah,
it was intense, and it was definitely. I wouldn't even say it was a string. It was more like a rope. If you do this, you will get my attention, and if you get my attention, then I may love you. And that was very powerful.
Yeah.
And I just translated that right into my relationship with women and my children before now, and I think that's definitely where people pleasing comes from. And again, I want to make the distinction between people pleasing in a pathological way and buying earrings for someone you love, right? That's totally different.
But I think the listeners, it's not hard, right? So when we build awareness, this people pleasing that's against the detriment of yourself is dangerous in a subtle way.
Yeah. And
when you're giving,
the thing is, it can morph from non-harmful to harmful over years without you even realizing that it does that. And we were talking earlier, like, how do you know when that transition happens? And I think probably one of the biggest symptoms of unhealthy people pleasing is resentment. So when and this happened, right? So like I would do something, and I would, while getting dressed to go to a party I didn't want to go to, I'd be in the bathroom going, motherfucker.
Right.
Fuck
anger.
This shit. You're like, fuck this. Why the fuck am she's, and you really are talking, like you're saying to yourself what you would like to say to the person who's pressuring you to do something you don't want to do. But you're mad because you're doing it against your will. And then the resentment just builds. And then of course I never shared that. I never told her that I didn't want to go. I just would fester. And that for me, that's like a pretty big symptom. For example, now when Alix asks me to do something, she asks me to do stuff I don't want to do all the time, by the way. So that happens all the time. All the time she'll ask me,
I mean, that's relationships, right?
right,
Like
we're doing this
we're
on
two different
Saturday.
people.
We're doing this on Saturday. I'm like, "Ugh,
Like yesterday, I made us go on like this very long,
walk, right.
like hour-long hike in these hills.
But the difference is I don't get mad when she asks me to do it. I don't get mad actually when I comply to do it. And then every time I do it, it feels good. So we haven't had the case yet where she's asked me to do something that I've done that I felt bad about. When that happens, I will share that with her and we'll work through why that. And I already trust that she'll give me the space to say no or give me the space to say, yes.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I think I want to talk about why that is with us, right? So, what's the difference between our first marriages where there was a decent amount of resentment? I had a lot as well, um, versus our now marriage, which there, David asked me to do things as well all the time that I don't want to do, all the time, actually. And I also don't have resentment towards him. So, I've been really thinking about how to describe this to you guys. And if you're following us, we are really heavy on building this company. We're such a startup, so it's early days, but the app is making some massive transformation, and my team is working incredibly hard. I wrote a blog this week that was just published about this, about authenticity, and the reason sometimes it's easier to write than it is to talk because there's conversation, and so we get a little off topic. But I think let me start by saying I agree with you that this happens in the home as a child. I think that the world needs us to be a certain way, and then when we're not that way, we get feedback from our caregivers that we're unlovable unless we fit into this box. I had a very different upbringing than David. Uh, on the outside, yes, two loving parents. My mother suffers from deep depression. She always has and still does. And um, deep depression is something I don't talk about a lot, but it is challenging to grow up in a home with your maternal caregiver being depressed. Uh, you can't do anything to fix them, to help them want to get up, be happy, or participate in your life. And that sets an internal tone that when you do something to please them because they struggle with happiness, right? Like that's a chemical problem. It's not their fault. You get that little nugget of happiness or feedback that you did something. You learn to shapeshift every part of who you are to um, help your loved one feel better. And so I also grew up with a narcissistic father. I don't think he was always narcissistic. I need to be careful throwing that term out. I will say that I've had a really strong trauma therapist diagnose him as that, or at least clinically inform me that she thinks that is the DSM that he falls under. It wasn't always like that though. He in the beginning was gentle and loving, but also had a deep well of unhappiness. He was abused as a child. And I think between my mom's depression, his inability to make her happy, um, that created sort of this volatile cycle where his need to be heard and good at everything got more and more intense as the problems in my home grew. Right, we had a lot of kids, so teenagers, and as our difficulty in teenage years grew in our house, I think my need to make everybody okay got higher and higher. I was fifth of six, so a little bit further down the line, and I often felt like I was caregiving for my little sister, making sure she was okay, and really mothering my mother and mothering myself completely and fathering myself completely. And then when my father left my mother, I would say that I felt very responsible for my entire home and making sure that my mom didn't commit suicide. That's a lot to say on camera. And mom, I know you're going to listen to this. I love you. And I know you did the best you can. And I'm proud of you for always working on yourself. That's far more than I can say about my father. And why I'm saying all this is that I think if you want to look at your familial past and ask yourself as a child, did you constantly have to change or hide who you were, what you needed? Did you have to shape who you were, shape shift? They're called survival skills, right? Survival patterns. And these are things that we do to protect ourselves so that we learn quickly that when we do something that's not acceptable or liked by our caregivers, we change who we are to become what they need us to be so that we're lovable, because there's a deep well in all of us. And this is a theme about authenticity that I think is crucial that we learn. The reason we struggle to be authentically ourselves and stop people pleasing is because we have a deep fear that if we are who we really are, we will not be loved. And when I do retreats, which we do them all over the globe, this is the universal theme, that every single person is deeply afraid to be authentically themselves because they think if they unzip, that their family, their loved ones will not love them anymore. And you know what I've come to is they might actually be right. They might actually be right. So, A, did you have a past where you had to people please in order and change yourself in order to be loved? If you've been in that pattern, you're comfortable in that pattern. I want you to look inside of yourself. And since we're a somatic company, what that means is we're asking you to embody, be in your body and feel your way through your emotionality, not just be in your head, because your head will try to rescue you, right? So the limbic system in your brain is trying to keep you safe. It will do any pattern that has worked for you in the past, whether that's a positive pattern or anymore or not, that's kept you safe. It'll keep you there, right? That's the fight, flight, or freeze kind of responses that we go automatically into without thinking. And we go on autopilot. So I want you to ask yourself, like, how many times a day and I'm going to leave out work because work is tricky. I think if we can't be authentic with our deepest loved ones, we're clearly not going to be authentic at work. Okay. Work is a monetary gain. And I like to think of us as finding work that makes us feel pleasure, but I recognize that is probably unrealistic. And so today we're not going to talk about work because that's a whole nother topic, but we're just going to talk about relationships. And how many times a day in your relationship, in your mothering, are you needing to change people? Are you trying to make it better for people? Are you hiding what you really need? Are you grumbling to get to your to-do list? Are you saying, fuck me, I don't want to do this. Oh, now we gotta do this for my kids. I gotta go to a basketball game. Like, we all feel that. Like, that's a normal part of like this long to-do list that we carry. But the truth is that I want you to understand that we're creating an internal and external friction. It's an internal friction. That if we can build some somatic awareness in our bodies, we might start to notice that, like, you start to have a little bit of somatic response. So the body understands that you're angry, you're upset, you're not feeling right. Your heart might start to flutter a little bit more. You might feel constricted in your throat, right? So our heart, our vascular system, and our respiratory system are actually ran by our vagus nerve. And I'm learning a ton about this in my class. So literally the way that we breathe and the way that our heart races or is calm is reflective of our stress level. Right? So there's stress that's good, exercise, and there's stress that's emotional, not good, right? We're afraid. We don't like what's happening. Our body will feel that well before our brain registers. And actually, because you just talked about this, we suppress our brain because we want to stay safe and loved. So we don't want to say how we feel. And I can contest that I lived an entire life where I built this internal, external friction from my childhood all the way up until Carl died. And it was this large gap. It created this large space between who I actually am and what I presented to the world. And I gave out all of myself thinking that was because that's how I was taught I would be lovable. Is if I give and give and give and give and give, and I would find the ways, I would empath the ways to make people happy. And when I got that glimmer of happiness, just like the little girl in me who was trying to make my mom be less depressed and love me, see me, that's what I would look for in everyone else. So those of you who may know me on a deeper level know that I have a strong pull to intuitively understand people, and I will get to the heart of who you are right away. But that skill set of mine that makes other people think that I see them in a way no one else does. I've got this power then, to empathically understand how you're feeling and can hold a lot of space for others. That also has been a double-edged sword in my life, and it probably is for you too, those of you listening who are people pleasing. You are halting your own instincts and needs to give others what they need. And it's okay to give others what you need when you're still taking care of yourself. And this is why I crash and burn in every relationship, because what I've come to is I've always blamed others, like, when I set a boundary or when I said what I needed, why these people can't be happy for me and let me be who I am. I was mad about it for years. The last probably 3 years, I've been very mad about it. And what I realized is it's my fault. It's my fault. I'm going to call it lying because it was a subconscious lying. It's a subconscious need for everyone to be okay that I did, hiding myself, protecting myself underneath all these layers of friction inside, that when Carl died, and after 5 years of caregiving, and my son's depression probably lit a spark in me that, like, I don't want him to ever feel what my mom has had to feel. Like, that's a hard struggle. I didn't want him to be chronically depressed. And I needed him to be okay. And I didn't have the energy in the pandemic to fix my business, fix my kids, fix myself,
Yeah.
and show up for other people's shit that I literally could barely do my own family, right?
Yeah, I would say awareness of this is such a huge driver behind almost every decision we make.
It is.
And shedding it is so dramatic
It's so hard.
that I think it comes across to other people as kind of crazy,
Mhm.
but it really does allow you to make decisions that from the outside look, risky and dangerous and all that stuff that society and other people feel. But from the inside, it feels fantastic. It feels so authentic. And I think it's that assuredness about those decisions that make people uncomfortable, because they're so in the people pleasing thing that it's uncomfortable to watch someone else do something really authentic.
Yeah.
I know that,
but it's scary at first.
a lot of our decisions have seen from the outside as dangerous and risky, but for us, I mean,
So I want to
they
say
feel
too
so
to the
real.
listeners, he's right. We're so blessed and lucky, whatever the word you want to say is. Like, I have a lot of gratitude for our partnership. We have worked very hard to get here, but it's much easier for me to be authentic with David being authentic by my side.
Yeah.
It was a much more difficult. So if you're single out there without a partner who's supporting this authenticity, or a person that you can really reveal your real self with, it's much, much harder. When I was not married, not together with anyone,
Yeah.
and single, widow, I really struggled. So I really struggled. I had to still be authentic, but the friction that you might feel with setting boundaries hurt me deeply. So
Yeah.
if I did something I needed for myself and then people got angry or upset with me, I felt all this shame.
I'm sure it's possible to do by yourself,
It's
but
really
I think
hard.
it's much more difficult, particularly if you're in the active process of wanting to meet somebody, and you feel a lot of pressure to be a certain way because you think that you have to be a certain way to meet somebody. And we're not immune to that by any stretch. But I think that makes it difficult. Whereas when you have the support, or of a soundboard, which is I love that role of therapy.
Right.
To a large degree, that is kind of what therapists can do, is they can tell you that no, your authentic self is okay, and they don't have any, horse in the race, right? I mean, they're just there to recognize you and say that it's okay. You know what I mean? They're not trying to love you.
You want to find a therapist that challenges you. I'm going to keep saying this. I keep hearing a lot of people reaching out to me talking about their therapist, that they're seeing that they're really not getting anywhere. They're not getting any. They're like just doing cognitive therapy where they talk and the person listens. Little feedback, little advice. Again, the listeners out there, the more that I study, of course, I've been deep in trauma therapy, and my trauma therapist is so gifted that she naturally does the EMDR phases. But I would say that if you can find an EMDR therapist, and I want you to make sure that you're looking that they have different stages and phases. So they are trained in multi-level of the EMDR. And if you can find a somatic EMDR, they often usually have like a duality of like brain spotting, certain things like that. So you want to really look at some people out there who can help you walk through and uncouple traumatic events. So imagine that there's big trauma, little trauma, right? Little traumas are just like those little things where your parent may have done something that made you feel abandoned, and then for the rest of your life, because they told you, oh, you're a terrible singer, you never sang again, right? Like, they made a joke about your singing, you never sang again because you were like, oh my God, my mom thinks I'm a terrible singer, I'm not singing anymore. Like,
Not just your parents. I mean, I
but
think
people,
I told you
right?
the story. My brother used to always get in trouble for talking, which retrospectively seems so crazy. But he would always get like pass or C or whatever
Talkative.
the grade was in class for conduct. And it was always talks too much, I mean, so there's just constant reinforcement that what he had to say wasn't important, that he should keep his mouth shut, um, that you really don't have anything to say that's of value. And it's a terrible kind of repetitive, it was repetitive, went on for a long time. And I think we have to be careful not to do that, to listen and to not build those problems.
Right.
But
parenting is a really whole lesson. I mean, it's a whole podcast, because the parenting and not people pleasing means that you're, as you talked about with Kate, you're allowing your children to not be okay.
Yeah, that's really hard.
Really so hard, because your instinctual job is to make them okay.
Alex told me the other day, he's like, you can't give them space to make mistakes and not expect them to make mistakes. But it's really, really hard to watch them make mistakes.
Really hard.
But
I think if you look at life, like, when do you learn the most as an adult? When you make a failure or a mistake, if you allow someone to feel the weight of their choices, if you allow someone to feel the weight of, like, my son right now is struggling to get this homework assignment done, and he is the master I mean, actually all of our kids are procrastinators, for God's sakes. We have a bunch of ADD going on in our house, and everybody very high IQ, and then they just almost have to push themselves against a wall, and with the clock ticking behind them before they'll kick into, like, and there's a lot of research on ADD that, like, that actually is physiologically how the brain will kick on an ADD. Like, they need the pressure to get going. Mm-hmm. Otherwise they can't get going. Mm-hmm. But, like, it's 50% of his grade. I need him to finish the project because I don't want him to have a bad grade, and I don't want the repercussions for him right? Do you hear? And this is what all mothers and fathers do. It's like, I mean, I hear some of the moms will go, like, on a walk, and the moms in our classes will be like, oh, I can't believe we have that math project due this week, and that project
I've heard that
due.
A lot.
We laugh, say
we'd like to go to dinner Friday.
We're done with school,
but we have a science project to do.
Yeah,
we have a science.
Well, and, like, at the science fair, like, I definitely don't do my daughter's work for her. I mean, I push child along because of, as we just discussed, but you can look at a science fair where there's poster boards, like, I mean, perfect symmetry of their glued on work at 10 years old, and their hypothesis and their experiment is, like, multifaceted. You're like, no freaking way did they do that all on their own. There's no way.
It's one of my favorite things about Montessori, actually, is Montessori deals with that basically by cutting the parents out, right? So they do 90% of their project at school, where the teachers do not help them much.
Right.
And you can tell, like, you go to the science fair and you're like, I mean, the words are all jumbled and the boards are half fallen down and the presentation doesn't really work.
But it's amazing for life, right?
It's like hilarious.
Right. That's a metaphor for how life actually needs to be. So a book that we like to recommend, and I recommend this for, like, every possible way, but people pleasing is essentially codependency in many ways. Like, it becomes codependency when you're in parenting relationships, and you're trying to, like, not have the other person feel their feelings, because I don't want them to hurt, right? I don't want my husband to feel the disappointment if I say I'm not in the mood to have sex. Okay, so I'm not in the mood to have sex. I don't feel good. This is a common scenario in marriage. Or even the wife. The wife doesn't want to have sex. That actually happens probably more commonly. Women don't want to have sex. The men really want to have sex. And then the women, like, they shut that down, and there's no conversation, right? So that's a common coupling where what the sex therapist say? She said they were like, you're like sexual incongruency, essentially, where nobody's on the same page.
Right.
So one person either suffers in silence, has the sex, doesn't really want to be there,
right,
gets it done, and inside your head you're like, resentful, okay? Or the woman says, hell no, like, I can't even think about your needs. Like, and this is an interesting one, because you have to think about both people's needs potentially in this. And then there's a lot of resentment there too, right? So that may not be the best example, because it's a little.
No, but that's her specialty, is trying to bridge that gap and desire.
The inconsistency.
Right.
But I think what we're talking about is
that's a common
gap. Okay, so there's a gap between giving and receiving when you don't want to. And then when resentment builds is in that gap, is when we allow little bits of ourselves to not be transparent to our partners, let's imagine that every energetic interaction where you give and you don't want to give, and you feel that friction on the inside, that little amount of friction, if that's like one M&M in the glass jar, over time, we're filling our jar. We're taking away internal space. If the jar represents our energy or internal, or maybe even like a gap between you and your partner connecting,
Yeah.
those M&Ms, I mean, think about that. Every interaction where you feel friction that you don't want to do, or you don't speak your truth, even if you're like, shit, David, I actually don't want to have sex right now because I'm so exhausted.
Mhm.
You do want to have sex. I am going to have sex, but this is why I feel kind of fat right now. And I don't feel pretty, and I'm so tired, and I'm kind of sad. This thing happened at work today. I'm just like, don't feel sexy. Your partner could then say to you, I'm so sorry that you had a hard day. I'm sorry that you're feeling fat. I think you're beautiful. I think you've never looked better. He could hold you for a little bit and talk a little bit about what's happening in your sadness. Then you can make love and
Yeah.
then connect on a real authentic way. But
Or
the
not.
friction,
I think a lot of times, just that interaction is actually really what he wants.
yeah, just the intimacy.
Yeah, I saw this show once where that they interviewed prostitutes,
Hmm.
and a significant number of the prostitutes had a lot of clients that just wanted to talk.
Just be held, maybe?
Yeah, just wanted to talk and be held, and then a lot of them didn't even have sex.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, so I think there's a significant. You talk about putting the M&M in it. I mean, not only do you add M&Ms, but the M&Ms can kind of swell unless you take the M&M out and say, "Hey,
This is the friction.
right,
This is the part of me that is feeling resistance."
right."
And so I really wanted to talk about this, and I'm a visual learner.
And maybe just discuss, for example, like,
Yeah.
why do you always want to have sex? Like, why do you want to have sex 24/7? You know, what about you wants to have sex 24/7? And maybe it's
The closeness.
yeah, maybe it's just a real need and void of intimacy.
Well, I think
And
for
I think
you,
that-
that's a really truth statement. Like,
and I think a lot of
David
people-
has, I would say, a very high sex drive. Sorry, parents who are listening, but there's often, I also do too. So we are well matched. But I would say that as a woman, the way that our brains work, and we talked about this with a sex therapist, and I get sometimes very shy to talk about our intimate life because in my home, being sexual as a female was actually quite shamed. My brothers were very much allowed to be playboys, and a high five, you had 55 girlfriends that snuck up the back staircase. But you better not get pregnant. You need to handle yourself. You don't need to be doing that. That's weird. Why are you? But we came from the same bloodline. My mom was one of 14 kids. I'm one of 6. Clearly sexual energy in my family line was happening. So it's natural that the girls and the boys might feel the same way. But when we talk about sexual energy between us, we're not always on the same page, like, because in my head, I've got a lot, like often what I said, not feeling good. I'm sad. I got all this stuff I've got to do, until for women, men who are listening, until sometimes women unpeel this long, heavy pressured to-do list, they cannot relax.
Mhm. And you're not even getting to like a lot of people bring trauma into that relationship.
Yeah, for sure. That's true.
And body issues and the societal and parental shame of being naked, and all that comes into that equation for a lot of people. And if you're not talking about it, it's just going to stay there, and it's going to continue to be there. It's going to fester and get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Sex is interesting because it should be more verbally talked about, but a lot of times, like in my first marriage, we didn't discuss sex. Like, we didn't talk about. I mean, we might have said like, oh, that, like we should try that, or like, something like fun like that. But we didn't discuss like when you're in the mood, when you're not in the mood, how we could be more connected, how I feel emotionally stepping into that space. And what's interesting that I've learned about David was, because he's actually the ultimate people pleaser. I mean, you really are. You are. Like, I think this is the biggest work he's had to do, is speak his truth. Take that M&M of friction and say, I actually don't authentically feel like I want to be a part of this. This isn't who I really am. This is who the world wants me to be. I mean, every role he's been in it requires him to show up in ways that are not authentic to who he is. A physician, hello, literally his entire job as an interventional radiologist is to actually do other people's work. Like he does all the hard things for other people. So there's this scary biopsy. I don't want to tell this lady she 100% has cancer. She's 95 and dying already. You do the biopsy and tell her that she's got cancer now.
That's true for a lot of physicians and nurses too.
Yeah, for sure. Medical world's 100%. It's got a lot of codependency in it too.
It does. And not just the patients, but the staff and everybody, particularly the patients.
But I'm getting off topic, but I always thought that maybe, like, I didn't realize this right away, that his high sex drive or his need for intimacy is really what it is. It's not, I'm going to call it sex drive, but it's really this need for intimacy, that was the only acceptable way, and it might be for a lot of men out there, to feel a connection, an emotional connection without words, right? He didn't have to use his voice to feel deep, powerful emotions, right? Because intimacy, when done in the right way, when safe, or, with the right partner, it's powerful, and it creates these like beautiful, strong emotions, and you feel strong things, and you're able to be like present and giving and receiving. And I think that I realize now that was an acceptable way for you to be extremely emotional, where maybe everywhere else in the world you weren't allowed to feel your feelings. Agree?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's definitely part of it.
And did it build a lot of friction for you? I mean, then did you have a lot of sexual friction when, I think, like, you didn't get that outlet?
Oh, definitely. And I wish we would have talked about it. And in my defense, I did try to talk about it, but she just wasn't ready to talk about it, or couldn't talk about it. And it was we never could get off of ground one, really.
Well, and I'm not going to apologize for talking about things that are hard in our first marriages. I know there's listeners that are going to be like, that's so ridiculous that you sit and talk about old issues for people who aren't here to defend themselves. Like there's that grandpa mentality. You shouldn't say something bad about the dead person because they're not here to defend themselves.
Actually, I mean, my answer to that is, this is not bad. This is common.
This is common. That's what I was going to say.
And if she was here, and I felt the way I feel now, I would
address the problem.
Address it and make us talk about it.
Well, remember, we're talking about our issues too. So it's joint, but it's our issues in the sense that, I mean, how much it's David's responsibility. It's my responsibility to not hide myself. It's been my responsibility to be who I authentically am. And I wasn't able to do that because I didn't feel lovable. And I was afraid of being unlovable, because that's been a pattern of mine for my whole life. So instead of telling the truth or being who I authentically was all through my relationships, I hid. And so when they all exploded in my face, I was even still not aware that this is a thing. And I blamed other people. So
coming back to the people pleasing thing, I mean, probably the reason I didn't talk to her about it was that I knew that it would upset her, and I didn't want to upset her, and I wanted her to be happy.
Yeah.
I wanted her to appear happy. And I knew that if we talked about this topic that she was uncomfortable with, that she would definitely, at least for that time, be unhappy. And I was scared to death to go there. So the people pleasing really, unfortunately, affects like a lot of your ability to have hard conversations and to really talk about how you feel, because feelings are, they can be uncomfortable, particularly for the person hearing them. Right. And you just avoid it because well, hey, I'm pretty happy if I just don't talk about it. You know what I mean? And pretty happy may be as good as I can get. And I'm worried that if I talk about it, that we won't be pretty happy anymore.
Yeah, there'll be no love. So there'll be nothing.
That's the codependency, people pleasing part that's really unhealthy. And then it grows and grows and grows.
Well,
and before long, you're not having, I say before long, 20 years, you're not having any conversations at all, because every conversation is potentially a conversation that will lead to the unhappiness and conflict, and you just want to.
But that's how relationships work. So the reason that we're talking about these difficult conversations that sometimes reveal our past relationships, and it's not to ever shame our past people, because it's really about us not being able to show up for them equally not able to show up for them, but is that we're talking about the space that you're building between the M&Ms stacking in the jar of your internal energetic dialogues between each other. So what separates David and I, which is the question I said, how are we going to get to that? What separates David and I's relationship from Carl and I's relationship, at least for me, is in every moment, I'm actually being authentically myself to the best that I'm able to be with the knowledge that I have. So that grows with introspection meaning looking inside, knowing myself, becoming more aware, journaling. I'm doing work with a therapist. Like I'm constantly trying to kind of just meditate and figure out, like, how did I get where I am? And more or less, I'll tell the listeners, it's not always cognitive. awareness that makes you better. It's physical awareness. So how does my body feel in this moment? Your body's very, very smart. It actually knows a lot more than your brain. Your brain's always trying to protect you. So it puts these like falsities in front. But like when I just feel my body, I don't want to do that. My body strongly sending me a signal. I'm not in the mood for that. I can't do that. I translate that to David. And so the space between us, we're right on top of each other. We're holding hands the whole time. But what I mean is there isn't a lot of gap between who I am inside and who he sees outside. The external and internal friction is really minimal.
Yeah. And actually, I was just thinking, like, why is that? And I think for me,
Vulnerability.
no, I think for me, it is, and that was the big change for me, was that I changed from valuing the appearance of happy to actually being happy.
Yeah.
And being aware has made me so happy that I get a lot of positive feedback from being aware of myself, that's the choice that I've made. Back then, I chose not, I valued more stability and appearances and
Well,
not,
fear was winning
yeah,
for us back then.
exactly. And then when the tragedy happened, that became way less valuable. In fact, it's so less valuable now that I shun it. I don't want anything to do with it. I only want to be my authentic self, and I only want to learn and grow, which is the reason we spend time having these conversations.
Right.
It's because we both value our authentic selves more than the appearance of happiness. And
well,
that's a huge.
It's very lucky for us in a non-lucky way. When you become a widow, you walk in a room, and you can feel the energy. Oh man, that you know who that girl was? That's the girl whose husband had the stomach cancer. He had the bleed out and his son had to call 911. He was bleeding all over the house. Yeah, God, he died 2 years ago. I heard her son got kicked out of Christian Brothers. Yeah, that's sad. I don't know if they're doing okay. That's what's happening. So imagine that the world presents your tragedy is like, oh, everyone feels sadness for you. And that it comes from a place of love, right? And worry.
For sure.
But it's a separation between everyone and you. Right. And so already you're so unique, you're so different. We're lucky in the way that like whether we wanted to or not, our story that we didn't ask for, that was just slammed in our life, we had to handle it. We weren't braver than anybody else. And trust me, if that situation happens to you, you'll handle it because you keep stepping forward because you're alive and you're going to do the best you can with what you got. But it does give you a massive separation between you and the rest of the world.
That's true.
And so we're already not normal. We're not normal. No one treats you normal. So you're already not normal. So for you guys actually out there that don't have tragic loss or some kind of major thing that the whole world stares at you and it's like, oh, that person's so strange. You have to work 10 times harder because everyone expects you to send out your perfect Christmas card.
Yeah, I actually think that
you're working 10 times harder to break these patterns than I was because my world was broken.
I think that phenomenon is the reason we take vacation. That's the definition of vacation, right? You're stepping out from your normal requirements.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, a lot of that stress goes away when you're no longer listening to what you should be doing. You're on vacation. You're on the beach.
That's a very acceptable thing.
Right. But when you're in it, it's very hard to separate because there's constant TV, social media.
Well, the yogis, the Buddhists all say this, right? You know, we do this work to work hard in the hard, not when things are ideal.
Right.
So this work is hard in the hard. And, again, the simple tools of getting embodied, get inside your body and ask yourself, do I feel that friction that I do not want to do this? Am I hiding? Like, am I doing something for my partner that is creating an M&M of friction gap between us? That if I just told him, and it takes actual radical kindness for you to be able to tell your truth without setting a boundary with angry. So like when I first did this without David, and was setting boundaries in the world alone, I wasn't very nice about it because I didn't think I deserved it.
Me too.
And so I was a bitchy boundary setter. And I caution those of you, I mean, sometimes you just got to get that shit done, because being a bitch externally to set your boundary is less detrimental than leaving yourself abandoned. And
Than not setting it. I agree.
Mhm.
But it's
not authentic though.
It sucks. And I've done it 100 times. I do it with my parents all the time. I set these really kind of mean
You
boundaries.
do. You're always doing
I
it.
try not to now.
I'm like, stop being so
But
mean
I
about
know,
it.
I know.
Just say no.
Right. But it takes a lot of
Well, you can see, because with a parental relationship, you don't feel like you have
Right.
the right to say no.
right.
But we're adults now, we're not back in our childhood home. And so this is your life. You pay for it, you live it. And with all love and respect to our parents, I get it. As a mom, I guess when I have an adult child, I'll still be like, I birthed you, like you're still look at them as like,
it's happening right now.
I mean, yeah, exactly.
It's happening.
It is
with
happening.
Our 17.
It's happening with our 17-year-old who has his first girlfriend.
It's hard.
It's hard.
It's really hard.
And they're doing adult things, and you're like, you're still just a kid, but yet it's time for them to do adult things, but you have to step back and let them do adult things when you've already done those adult things.
Well, and he's not very good at laying down nice boundaries for us, whereas Kate Long is much more friendly with her boundaries. Now she'll say fuck no, but she's generally nice about it.
Kate feels safe with us. And so in that, she's actually is, but that's the thing about boundaries, right? When you don't feel safe, you angrily lay down your boundaries. Right. So if you're angrily laying down your boundaries, you need to look at the relationship that you're in, that you keep having to be so pissed off that that the person's not giving you what you need, or you're not allowing yourself to have what you need. And I guess this is the bigger topic in people pleasing, in perfectionism. There's a lot of different words under authenticity. So this is being authentic. I wanted to kind of discuss about self-sabotage. So I'm having this awakening in my therapy right now, where I'm seeing my trauma therapist still, and I started to see a lady named Dion. She's a shaman. She's literally a therapist and a shaman. She's like super multi dynamic. She does hypnotherapy and all these different modalities and electric work. So she called me out and said, like, well, if you haven't said what you needed, then the person said no, right? You weren't abandoned. So my entire childhood wound is abandonment, being left alone. Every problem I work from is that. I feel lonely. I feel like I'm always going to be left. And I got a lot of examples in my world that support that childhood belief and survival skill to avoid getting left. However, I'm trying to work out of that. Currently, we've got some things that, are going on in our world where I'm trying to prep to become a better version of myself, even more than I already am. And what I've come to is that I have been abandoning myself, because in every relationship that I've had up into this one with David, and my friendships that I'm still maintaining right now, which, let me let you know, I can count all my loved ones on 1.5 hands, 2 hands. I used to have 12 hands worth of people. My life has never felt more enriched and more meaningful. And I've never felt more safe and loved. And that's because I've stopped abandoning myself. So what Dion said to me was, well, did you ask exactly for what you needed directly? And then I had to answer that question. So if every time you need something and you don't, this is people pleasing, right? You don't say what you need to the person that you love or the relationship partner, or even maybe parenting. I'm not sure. Parenting is a little different depending on the ages of your kids. So you are abandoning yourself. You are not giving your loved one an opportunity to see the real you. This is a jar full of M&Ms of you hiding in friction. And there's what I like to say is a space between the true version of you on the inside and what you're presenting externally to the world outside. And so who you are outside of yourself to the world is not who you are on the inside. And so the person on the inside, the real you, the one that's happy, that we're talking about today, that David and I feel this deep connection with, what separates us from that other version of me is that I've abandoned myself in every scenario, in every relationship there. And I know why I've abandoned myself in the world. I've abandoned myself in the world because I've been taught in the world that I wasn't lovable for who I really was. And that it's more safe for me to abandon myself and get half love, also what David's talking about, appearance of love, than it is for me to be who I am and be actually left, because that part is really, really fucking scary, right? Like if I show you all of who I am and you leave me, you're telling me that I'm actually not lovable. And I actually can't change who I am on the inside. That is who I am. That's an unchangeable version of ourselves. We can change and grow a little bit, you know what I'm saying? But like there's an essence of who we are that doesn't change.
Yeah, I think that's the really unfair part of the, at least for me, for the widowship, is that widow dumb, whatever.
All bad words anyway.
Is I never gave her the opportunity to see the real me. So really, can't really argue that she abandoned me because I never really told her what I needed.
That's 100% accurate.
And
same with Carl.
The truth is, I mean, I don't know if she would have been able to give me.
What a huge regret that we have to sit with for the rest of our life, though. Like, do you not sit with the sadness of like, look what I did? So I created a jar full of friction. I created literally like an ocean full of separation. I would say you two had an ocean of separation. Carl and I probably had a river of separation. We actually did emotionally talk about everything outside of our deepest fears. So we were actually really emotionally connected, and we talked deeply about a lot of things close to us, but not our closest internal self. There was still, I would say I probably gave him half of who I was, not all.
Yeah, I mean that has a lot to do with my forgiveness.
Yeah.
Honestly, and my regret, because I still feel a lot of resentment because it built for so long. But the truth is, it's just not fair. It's not fair for me to carry that resentment because I never really told her how I felt.
Well, and it's not her fault either. Like, you know, it is, okay, let me rephrase that. When I think about their faults, it is and it isn't their fault. So I'm telling you my version of the story because there's a lot of difference between Betsy and I, right? We're different people. We're never the same, we're never going to be the same person. So let me be clear by saying that, because any of the listeners who know her well, I'm not by any means saying we're the same, but we're all the same universally. So inside, we're all the little child within that is scared that we're unlovable.
Yeah.
And we all use coping strategies to hide the parts of us that the world is sort of subtly telling us are making us unlovable. And so then we become the version of ourselves with these layers of protectedness, abandoning ourselves, and then we're resentful and lonely and sad. I've been lonely my whole life until I met you.
Yeah, and while you were talking, I was just thinking how freely we throw these concepts around now. When I distinctly remember the first time I heard this concept, that I felt unlovable, and
that was bullshit.
Yeah. I was like, that's not true. I know that I'm lovable. I've always been lovable.
If you're a listener of ours that think that we're talking bullshit,
yeah,
we love and support you.
Yeah.
Because it's actually quite difficult to stare at this shit.
It is.
And you want to run away from it because it's easier to do what we're saying, self-abandon. Because if you self-abandon, you don't have to look at how sad you are. Mm-hmm. When you look at how lonely you are, and the truth is, like, we want to blame outside of ourselves for all of our internal
100%.
struggles. But it's an inside problem. Like, Carl didn't do anything wrong except abandon himself.
Yeah.
While I simultaneously abandon myself. And in that gap between us is so vast. And I am a prayer, David is not. I pray to him all the time. And I like to tell him, like, I'm so sorry that I imagine you can see what David is getting of me. And I know he's happy for us because I just know him well enough to know that. But I'm sorry I didn't give you that part of myself, because we could have helped each other. And I sometimes wonder if he wouldn't have had cancer, that internal pressure. I think that friction that he felt all the time to please, I sometimes think that it's all vagal nerve right in the gut. And God, right where he got cancer is literally where his vagal nerve was actually severed in his surgery. It's just interesting. And some of you out there will be like, oh, that's bullshit. It's just bad chemistry. And I'm like, the truth is we're far more than just a body. We are a mind, and it is powerful. And this body is very powerful, and it responds, and it keeps us safe. And we have all of our chemical reactions in the body are to keep us safe. And we're human. So the way the brain has evolved, and we're mammals, is we need connection.
Right.
We need to be in partnership.
So I think that's the acceptable scientific way
Yeah,
to
go
say that
ahead.
is
That's the
that
woo-woo version.
our body has a lot to tell us, and generally we don't listen to it. I think that's
Well, the scientists, okay, so the polyvagal theory, which is, in my opinion, going to stop being a theory. There's so much science behind it. So impressive. And I've actually been having David study along, and he is a very realistic doctor. He's full science all the time, like very hard for him to step out of anything that doesn't have a lot of facts behind it, which I love about that. I love about it.
I think this was a natural evolution of psychology, sociology, psychiatry, is to eventually come back to where that they started, which was to find the connection between emotions, feelings, and the body.
Well, emotions are
Because
powerful, right?
You are your body. I mean, as an atheist, that's who you are. There's nothing outside of your body. And I think for a long time, we felt, particularly pop psychology in the 60s and 70s, we felt like it's all up here. If we just think better or have better thought patterns, that everything will be
Mindset.
okay. And meanwhile, we were really ignoring the visceral body response. And I love the fight or flight work that she's doing. It's super fascinating. And
Me too.
It's legit. What I like about it really is it's legit repeatable. It's physiological, and it makes sense with what we do know about the body. So we're learning what we don't know about the body.
There's so much.
Yeah, a lot, with using the tools. This is science in a nutshell. Using what we do know about the body to learn what we don't, that's the key.
Well, so what the polyvagal theory is proving, and it's really powerful, is when you repress memories, repress trauma. So let's imagine you had a traumatic event happen in your life, and in the amygdala, that part of your brain is where we store these, like it's almost like those PTSD memories. Like, so I have lots and lots of those are stuck in my amygdala until I can uncouple the memory. And that's like really powerfully done with bilateral stimulation or EMDR therapy.
Right. That's my point. So you do it with the body, right? So
it's in the body. You got to go.
You're helping the mind using stimulus and responses from the body, and vice versa. So you're helping the body with thoughts in your mind. So,
well, more importantly,
the idea that those two things are separate is, luckily, I think, kind of,
it's not. But there's a really easy measure for everyone out there to check your regulatory skills. So your heart rate variability, like if you have a Garmin or an Apple Watch, which like a ton of us do, you can check your heart rate variability and track it. So the heart rate variability is actually a vagal nerve response, right? So the vagal nerve is like, we're working the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems. Those are how our body is fight or flight and arrest and digest. Okay. So when we are feeling overwhelmed, stressed, or threatened, not safe, I'm going to just go ahead and if you watch on our social media, and what we're working on in the app is creating tools to help you get back to regulation. It doesn't mean you have to be regulated all the time. It's like we're just expanding your tolerance for stress. HRV is a measure for how you respond to stress. So your heart rate, like you can already think, I'm stressed out, I'm panting, my heart's racing, I'm sweating, I'm having visceral response physiologically in the body. When we are in prolonged stress or anxiety, or even freeze response, which is you're so stressed that your body stops listening to those, right? That shuts you down because you just can't keep on that path anymore. The body can only take that prolonged stress before it starts having physical symptoms. So Bessel van der Kolk, the body keeps a score. I'm actually literally studying under this guy right now. He's a fucking genius. The body keeps a score. He's like one of the original trauma therapists. He's basically saying that, like, no matter what, if you keep being stressed, and you're not listening to it, you're shoving it down, keep moving, shoving it down, keep moving, you're going to have disease. That is not well. That is when the body cannot regulate itself back into a tolerable level of stress. So the window of tolerance, that's a Deb Dana work, she's amazing, is basically like we have this window or this box that we can stay in where the body can feel stress and be okay without having disease states, not well states. When we get outside of that box, then we start to have physical manifestations, headaches, panic attacks, all sorts of like stomach aches, you know?
So this may not seem relevant to the topic today, which is people pleasing, but it kind of is.
It is very relevant.
Because your ability to have that wider range of tolerance basically should and will allow you to not people please, right?
Well, you have to be aware of how your body feels
So
in these
you people
situations.
please to avoid those feelings and to try to regulate in a narrow window
Right.
the feelings of love and goodness.
So we want to sum up today because there's so much to discuss about authenticity, people pleasing, but the big points we want to summate is, and the reason we ended on a lot of the somatics and the polyvagal theory is physically, if you're feeling signs of dysregulation where your heart is racing or you're anxious or you're feeling your stomach is hurting or you can't breathe, your shoulders are hurting, that's a common one for you, your neck is in pain, your back is killing you, like what are the physical symptoms that you're feeling and what are they, when do they pop up, what's happening around you when they pop up?
Mhm.
Are you feeling, and let's call all those symptoms friction, because I've used the word friction 100 times today. Friction meaning it's some heat, it's some kind of response that feels a little heavy or not natural. It's creating
something to avoid.
Yeah, it's something where you're like, oh, that kind of feeling. I got to get away from this. And then do you take a friction space or friction symptomology in your body and do you shove it down and keep moving to make everyone around you happy and just keep plugging through?
Right.
Or do you take a pause and say, like, what do I need right now?
Right.
Simple
Then you
way.
get in touch with your authentic self. That's the choice.
Yeah. So we're hopeful out there that this may shed some light on why people pleasing may happen, how it's happened for us, how we are bridging the gap between the space of I think it's non-truth of who we are, and that we are not, and we are special. I don't want to say we're not special because I do think our love is special, but what makes our love special isn't that special. It's actually just deep communication and transparency and taking those M&Ms of friction and things that are uncomfortable, and we're constantly opening up about that dialogue and at the risk of not allowing fear of not being lovable be more important than being honest with each other. Because my ending point for everyone out there is when you choose to people please and be inauthentic or unauthentic, I'm actually not really sure what the real word is. When you're not authentic, you're creating the space regardless. You're hiding yourself regardless. You're self-abandoning. We said it in 10 different ways. You are abandoning yourself regardless. You are creating a deep well of loneliness and sadness. You are more alone in that state than you would be if I told David exactly who I was and he decided that that wasn't for him. What do I learn in that state? Ouch, my heart's going to be broken. But the heartbreak in the well of loneliness and hiding isn't repairable until you start to show that part of yourself. And once you build patterns of telling someone I'm this way, and then you try to change it, it takes a great amount of work and probably a therapist to support you in that change for your partner to be able to bridge across a huge gap of water or gap of distance to say, wait a minute, I thought you were this person, but you're not this person at all.
Yeah, in fact, I think the next podcast or the next one we should talk about. So we've talked about people pleasing, and we should talk next because now we've identified it, we've defined it, we've given lots of examples about it. And the next thing we should talk about is something that Dion told us that I love, which is connection versus before correction.
I love that,
which is a big part of fixing the people. You can't really fix the people pleasing problem without an initial connection.
Connecting comes first.
Right. And then once you get the connection in that safe place, then you can do the correction. I think we should definitely talk about that next time.
Yeah. So I hope this helps. We're going to put in the show notes a lot of resources. The Body Keeps the Score is huge for learning about the visceral responses in the body and how we hold and store stress and what happens to your body in trauma. He's quite a trailblazer. If you've not read that book, it's really, 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 really high on my list. Yeah. Anything by Deb Dana, Window of Tolerance, you can literally there's so much information out there. She's the creator of Glimmers. You've seen us put about to her work on. Start to look at a little bit of nervous system work and see am I in my tolerance? Am I in my window of tolerance? Am I outside the tolerance? Those are awareness tools.
And don't forget about the app.
Our app is and I don't talk about it enough. And I think that's probably the humble side of me. I'm, of course, a people pleaser and a perfectionist, and I never feel my work is where I want it to be. And like, I don't know when will I start to promote when I think it's perfect enough. But we are in the process of completely overhauling, and it's becoming a nervous system healing. And nervous system healing just means feeling all your feelings and being aware and bringing yourself some tools for how to de-stress when you get really anxious. And then we're going to have some new tools coming out soon that are really, really cool to help you kind of dive into maybe the cognitive whys, or how did I get here, or maybe like the childhood link, so we can uncouple how we got to where we are and why our nervous system tends to go to fight, flight, or freeze. There's meditations, there's all kinds of stuff on there. It's my team is incredible, and I'm super, super lucky. So Wake Wellness app is an incredible resource if you haven't checked it out. Our website is about to be finished and popping up. We got a new retreat coming out this November where we're going to dive into rebirth. And rebirth is funny. It's like a beautiful term about, being reborn. You're the same person, but we're going to try to get you back to the little you, like the true you, the inner you, the one we're talking about today, before you sabotaged and abandon yourself. And so I'm teaching people, men and women and all people in the world, that it's okay to be the real you on the inside. And that's actually all you can be. And if you hide yourself from those you love, and you hide yourself from yourself, you're more alone than you would be if you chose to let the people who can't be a part of that true you let you go. And then, what's amazing is when you let those people go and wish for them in love and light to find people who they authentically match with, you find your true people, you feel more happy, you feel less anxious, and you're able to be safe enough to be who you are. And when you are who you are, there's a deep amount of peace in that. And we're really lucky. Tragedy has helped us get where we are. We had to have this big catalyst. Here comes our dog to let us know. And so I am really appreciative for you guys listening. I hope that we got a lot out of this today. We're trying to give a little bit more deep information on healing and get a little deeper. And so
that was good. Thank you all for hanging in with us.
Check out our resources, check out our app, check out our website, come see me in the retreat. I will be hosting in Mexico again. It was perfect. So if you want to come to heaven, and actually Dion, my shaman, she tends to work there. So you can get all the resources that we're talking about there. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody.
This has been Wake the F Up podcast, hosted by Alix and David Long. Be sure to check out other episodes where our community of experts share tools and ideas to help you wake to the life inside of you. If you enjoyed this episode of Wake the F Up, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Wake community by downloading our app. Just search for The Wake Wellness in the Apple or Android App Store. And follow us on Instagram at The Wake Wellness. Thanks for listening.